When he arrives home, the first thing he noticed was the silence. Patrick can be heard on the 911 call entering the home and heading to the basement. At one point, he calls out, "Guys." He can then be heard screaming in agony and shock as he found his children.
Welcome back, and thanks for being here. I'm Cassie, and this is A Wicked World. If you haven't checked out A Wicked World on Patreon yet and want to help support the channel even more, then click on the link in the description box below. There, you'll have access to over 40 exclusive Patreon-only videos, with new ones being added each month. The story I have for you today is one that gained national attention, as well as started a debate over whether or not the mother of these 3 beautiful children was suffering with some serious mental illness at the time that she killed them. Some people believe that she was just very sick and didn't know what she was doing, while others think this mother is just pure evil. Either way, 3 precious children lost their lives that had just barely begun. This is the story of Cora, Dawson, and Callan Clancy. Little Cora Clancy was born on December 24th, 2017, to her parents, Patrick and Lindsay Clancy. She was said to be very caring and would say that she wanted to be a doctor as well as a mama when she grew up. Cora would practice by giving her younger brother Callan checkups. And if she was leaving the house to go somewhere, she would pick someone to take care of Caroline and Charlotte, her 2 baby dolls. Before she had turned 2, Cora was already wrapping them in perfect swaddles. She also loved sloths, unicorns, tea parties, going to lunch with her Nana and Grandpa, and giving presents to people. Little Cora knew everything about princesses, her favorite being Sophia the First. She truly loved her little brothers and told them often in her sweet voice. When Cora was close to turning 2, her little brother, Dawson William Clancy, would come into the world on September 30th, 2019. Dawson was naturally generous, beyond the normal of a typical toddler, always willing to share his toys with others. For all the love he received, he was said to always give back more. His best quality was pure kindness. Dawson loved trucks, tractors, dinosaurs, Paw Patrol, worker guys, and being outside. He was said to be smart, adventurous, mischievous, and enjoyed causing trouble, which he typically found to be hilarious. The youngest of Lindsay and Patrick's children, Callan, was born 3 years later on May 26, 2022. He was their easygoing child, and just an incredibly happy and vibrant baby, constantly smiling. His parents' nickname for him was Happy Callan. He was sitting on his own and would grab any object within reach. Callan had also just recently started saying "dada" whenever his father Patrick walked into the room. The family of 5 lived together in their home located in Duxbury, Massachusetts. The children's father, Patrick, worked from home for Microsoft, while their mother, Lindsay, was a labor and delivery nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. On January 24, 2023, Lindsay had to attend a pediatrician appointment with her daughter Cora because the little girl had an upset stomach. Upon returning back home, Lindsay, along with Cora and Dawson, went outside to play and built a snowman together. Then shortly before 5 p.m., Lindsay would text her husband Patrick, who was working from home in the basement, asking him if he wanted to get takeout from the restaurant 3V because she hadn't cooked dinner that evening. Patrick thought this was a little odd because whenever the family did get takeout, they usually ordered from someplace a little closer, and the restaurant 3V was located in nearby Plymouth, which was close to a 12-minute drive away. But regardless, he agreed because the family had eaten at this restaurant before and enjoyed it. After deciding what they wanted to eat, Lindsay would call in the order at 5:10 p.m., and Patrick would leave the house about 5 minutes later. Right after he left the house, Lindsay would text him and ask him if on his way he could stop at CVS and pick up some children's Miralax for Cora. So Patrick would stop at the pharmacy, grab the medication, head to the restaurant to pick up the food, then return back home around 6 p.m. When he did arrive back at the home, he noticed that it was silent, which was very odd, given that they had 3 children under the age of 6. Upon not seeing his family, Patrick called up Lindsay's cell phone to ask her where they'd gone, but she didn't answer. So he made his way upstairs, where he found their bedroom door to be locked. After he opened it, he saw blood in front of the full-length mirror, as well as in front of the window that was open. Patrick then immediately ran downstairs and out to the backyard, where he found his wife, Lindsay, lying on the ground, and he called 911. She appeared to have cuts on her wrists and on her neck, though Patrick told the operator that they had stopped bleeding and Lindsay was conscious. During the emergency phone call, Patrick can be heard asking his wife what she had done, to which Lindsay told him that she had tried to take herself out of the world by jumping out of the window. Patrick could also be heard on this 911 call asking his wife where the children were, and she would tell him that they were in the basement. However, Patrick did not immediately go to the basement to check on his children, instead staying with his wife Lindsay, because at the time, he believed she was the only one who was injured. When first responders arrived on the scene, Patrick asked them to stay with Lindsay so he could go check on the kids. The father was still on the phone with 911 when he went into the house and down into the basement to look for them.
Patrick can be heard on the 911 call entering the home and heading to the basement. At one point, he calls out, "Guys." He can then be heard screaming in agony and shock as he found his children. His screams seem to get louder and more agonized as the time passes.
Patrick found each child with an exercise band wrapped tightly around their neck.
He removed the bands and begged them to breathe. He continued to scream uncontrollably and screamed for officers to come to the basement. The dispatchers are hearing this and they send help down to the basement. And when they encounter Patrick, he yells out, "She killed the kids."
Cora, Callan, and Dawson were rushed to a waiting ambulance. Upon arrival at the hospital, Cora and Dawson were declared dead. Little Callan, who was just 8 months old, was still fighting for his life, and he was transported via medical helicopter to Boston Children's Hospital. Here, the medical staff was able to restart his heart, but not his brain activity. Callan would be placed on life support for the next 3 days before he also passed away. The children's mother, Lindsay Clancy, had been brought to South Shore Hospital and then to a Boston area hospital where she would remain for a while, with several broken bones in her back and in her rib cage. At the time the mother was admitted to the hospital, she was found to have 7 different prescription medications in her system, including several antidepressants, a mood stabilizer, and anti-anxiety medication. Apparently, Lindsay had been struggling greatly with her mental health in the months leading up to murdering her 3 children. Lindsay, who already had anxiety to begin with, claimed that it had only gotten worse as she prepared to return to work following the birth of the couple's youngest child, Callan. So she had postponed her start date and gotten a prescription for the antidepressant Zoloft, following a telehealth appointment with a psychiatrist who had diagnosed her with generalized anxiety disorder. The psychiatrist prescribed additional drugs to Lindsay, including the benzodiazepine, Ativan, due to the previous prescription Zoloft causing her insomnia. When his wife's insomnia persisted, Patrick began sitting in on her virtual visits with a psychiatrist. According to him, they merely asked what her symptoms were and then prescribed her pills. Patrick also said that he had made more than a dozen calls to different therapists to get Lindsay seen, but none of them had immediate availability. By mid-November of 2022, the mother had seemed to have lost her appetite and stopped socializing for the most part. When her prescription Ativan wore off in the afternoons, Patrick would say that he would sometimes find her on the couch, rocking back and forth with her heart racing. After she had had 2 consecutive nights with no sleep, Lindsay drove herself to the emergency room and obtained another prescription, this time for Ambien. The Ambien didn't help though, and Lindsay began to see a psychiatric nurse practitioner. According to Patrick, this nurse was even more quick to prescribe Lindsay additional medication. She would end up being prescribed 7 medications in all, including Zoloft, Ativan, Valium, Trazodone, Klonopin, Prozac, and Seroquel. Now, Patrick Clancy had told his friends that he believed Lindsay was addicted to her benzodiazepines, but he also expressed that he believed her anxiety was normal and not severe. Patrick was concerned about Lindsay having withdrawals from this medication too, stating that she had the worst possible side effects, but didn't specify any further. Lindsay had then been evaluated on December 20th, 2022 for postpartum depression, but doctors did not diagnose her with it. This was a little more than a month before she committed her horrific acts. Patrick would later tell police that his wife had confessed to having thoughts about taking herself out of the world, as well as thoughts about hurting her children at the same time. According to him, they were told by a doctor that if she didn't have a plan and she was disturbed by these thoughts, then they were probably just thoughts. Patrick also said he had never been made aware of the risks of postpartum psychosis by a doctor. Still struggling with her mental health, Lindsay voluntarily admitted herself to McLean Hospital in Belmont for 5 days, starting on January 1st, 2023. When she was discharged, she was given no paperwork and was not seen as a danger to herself or anyone else. According to Lindsay's defense attorney, in the weeks leading up to her children's murders, she was feeling detached and emotionless towards her kids, and had been unable to express any happiness, sadness, or even cry. Even though many think that Lindsay was suffering from a postpartum psychosis when she killed Cora, Callan, and Dawson, there are a few things that could give this case a very different and much more horrifying truth. The first thing that made people start questioning whether Lindsay was really sick when she killed her children was that when she woke up in the hospital on January 27th, using a whiteboard as she was still intubated, she wrote out, "Do I need an attorney?" The mother knew that she had killed her own children, and she had the clarity and understanding to focus on protecting her own rights and interests. Lindsay would even reach out to her husband Patrick while she was in the hospital. On February 5th, she called his phone, but he didn't answer, and she would leave a voicemail telling him that she loved him. The next day, Lindsay would use a doctor's cell phone to again call her husband, and this time he answered. During their conversation, Lindsay would tell him that when he had left the house on January 24th, she had killed the children because she had heard a voice and had a, quote, moment of psychosis. Patrick had asked Lindsay what voices she heard, and she told him that she had heard a man's voice telling her to kill herself and the kids because it was her last chance. By that point, as she lay in her hospital bed, Lindsay Clancy had been charged with strangulation, homicide, and assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. She would be arraigned from her hospital bed and pleaded not guilty to her charges. Lindsay was also now paralyzed from the waist down. She was later moved to Tewksbury State Hospital and ordered to stay there for 6 months so that doctors could provide her with extensive mental health care. Now, Lindsay's defense attorney was arguing that she was severely overmedicated by psychiatric drugs, as well as inadequately treated for postpartum, which she had allegedly been experiencing in the months leading up to the murders. She had searched on her phone for directions from the home to 3V Restaurant, so she would know how long her husband would be gone for, which seems like a bit of premeditation. However, Lindsay would claim that she had only looked at how long it would take because she was afraid that Patrick would get stuck in rush hour traffic. Once Patrick had arrived at the CVS that evening to get the children's medication, he had called Lindsay at 5:33 p.m., but she didn't answer. She, however, had called him back a minute later, and the call lasted a mere 14 seconds. According to Patrick, he had no issues communicating with her, and the call was completely normal. Although he did mention that she seemed like she was in the middle of something. So if she was in a psychosis, could she have answered the phone and acted completely normal during the call? By that point, she had to have already been in the middle of carrying out her monstrous plan. According to the hostess who had taken the order for their dinner at 3V Restaurant, Lindsay did not sound impaired in any way. She sounded completely normal. Lindsay had also previously called the CVS that she had sent Patrick to make sure the medication they needed was in stock. And the person who had answered the phone and spoken to Lindsay said the same thing, that she was fine. Nothing seemed off at all. The nurse and receptionist who had been at Cora's doctor's appointment earlier that day said the same. There was nothing concerning about Lindsay's behavior. According to Patrick, Lindsay seemed to be having one of her best days in a while. In the days, weeks, and months leading up to January 24th, Lindsay had been keeping a journal in which she documented her mental state, tracked her medications, and wrote about her feelings towards her children. These notes were always clear, precise, and articulate. She never indicated that she was hallucinating, delusional, or had any disordered thoughts or speech, something you would expect to see with someone who was suffering from psychosis. Then just the day before Lindsay had killed her children, she had written in her journal saying that she felt just a touch of postpartum anxiety, but also wrote about returning back to work soon. Police found that Lindsay had written in her phone back in October of 2022 that she thought she sort of resented her other children because they prevented her from treating Callan like her first baby. Which is an odd thing to say, because if you already have 2 older children, why would you expect that they would let you act like a first-time mother? They're kids. Lindsay continued on by saying that she knew it wasn't fair to Cora and Dawson, and she also felt like her depression rubbed off on the children. Lindsay wrote on another occasion, "I want to feel love and connection with all my kids." This indicated that she did not have that with at least one of them. But she wanted more kids at the same time. Only 4 days prior to killing the children, Lindsay had done a search on her phone for, "Can you treat a sociopath?" Police additionally discovered that the mother had searched on her phone for ways to kill not long before she had murdered her 3 kids. Though Lindsay would later say that the reason she had looked this up was because she had thought about taking herself out of the world for about 2 months. Adding to the list of things that made Lindsay's actions seem premeditated was the fact that the Plymouth County prosecutor suggested that the mother's attempt to take herself out of this world might not have been as serious as they originally thought. This was because there were blood streaks found underneath the outside window, which were likely from the cuts on Lindsay's neck and wrists as she slid out the window and down to the ground below, rather than jumping as she had said she did. Those who believed that Lindsay was simply a mother who was struggling with postpartum depression and hadn't been properly treated for it, wrote to her defense attorney vouching for her. Nearly 40 letters of support came in from Lindsay's family, friends, and complete strangers, all calling her a loving and doting mother. A fellow nurse from the Massachusetts General Hospital, where Lindsay had worked as a labor and delivery nurse, wrote that the mother lived and breathed for her children. The letter went on to say that Lindsay's first priority was always for her children to feel loved, safe, and happy. And this nurse had even trusted Lindsay with her own children for the past 3 years. Another person who was friends with Lindsay said that they were steadfast in the belief that Lindsay's greatest joy was being a mom and watching her children grow. Yet another said there wasn't anything that Lindsay loved more than her husband and her children. A GoFundMe was created for the family shortly after Cora, Dawson, and Callan's deaths, in order to help Patrick pay for the medical bills and funeral costs for all 3 children. On the campaign page, Patrick would write about his kids, as well as ask the public to forgive his wife as he had already done. Patrick said that Lindsay had a condition that rapidly worsened, though he didn't specify what condition this was. He went on to say the real Lindsay was genuinely loving and caring towards everyone. Me, our kids, family, friends, and patients. The very fibers of her soul are loving. All I wish for her now is that she can find some peace. Patrick continued, "The shock and pain is excruciating and relentless. I'm constantly reminded of them, and with the little sleep I get, I dream about them on repeat. Cora, Dawson, and Callan were the essence of my life, and I'm completely lost without them." He also wrote about how his youngest son, Callan, had died with enormous courage despite being so little. Patrick stated, "Maybe it was his way of demonstrating what I need to do to press forward. I'll always try to draw inspiration from him. He'll always be my little hero." A candlelight vigil was held at the Holy Family Church in Duxbury on January 26 to grieve the lost lives of Cora and Dawson Clancy, as well as pray for Callan Clancy, who had not yet died at that time. Many from the community of Duxbury attended and were beyond devastated and heartbroken. A private funeral was later held on February 3, 2023, at St. Mary of the Nativity in Scituate for 5-year-old Cora Clancy, 3-year-old Dawson Clancy, and 8-month-old Callan Clancy. A memorial service would also be held for all 3 children in Duxbury exactly 1 year after they had been killed. Their father, Patrick, who had since sold the family's home in Duxbury and moved to Manhattan, returned to Massachusetts for the service. The father also ran in the Boston Marathon in memory of his kids.
After he crossed the finish line here on Boylston Street, as he was emotional, it is his first marathon, and he says it was therapeutic for him. Now, he raised all of that money for Boston Children's, the hospital that treated his youngest son, but sadly, none of his 3 children survived. His wife is charged in their deaths. They were all under the age of 5, and today he ran to honor them.
I loved my kids. They're wonderful people. They had a lot of friends. Everybody loved them. And they had short lives, but they had really good lives.
And it is so clear how much Patrick Clancy loved his children. But again, he said he wanted to run his first marathon as a sort of therapy. And as he came those 26 miles, he said that along the sidelines, everyone was cheering his name, although his name was not on his bib. So a lot of people know who he is. A lot of people are there to support him. He also had the support of his 3 kids. He had his daughter's bow on him and a bracelet and an armband from his 2 sons. So they were right there with him as he crossed the finish line today.
Patrick recently did an interview in October of 2024 in which he said that he was never married to a monster, just someone who had gotten very sick. Patrick Clancy said that if he could go back in time, he would have called McLean Hospital, where Lindsay had committed herself for 5 days back in January of 2023, and told them to take her away, lock the door, keep her in there for a year if you have to. After Patrick and Lindsay had spoken on the phone when Lindsay was in the hospital, they had then gone 6 months without talking to one another. But Patrick would end up reaching out to Lindsay on her 33rd birthday. During this call, she would tell her husband that every day was the worst day of her life because she missed her kids. Patrick would also, at the time, not comment on his marital status. But he still referred to Lindsay as his wife, so it's likely the couple is still married. According to him, Lindsay wants nothing more than to tell her side of the story. And she's floated the idea of becoming an advocate for mothers with postpartum. However, her lawyer has repeatedly advised her to not speak to any reporters before her case goes to trial. Lindsay's next court date is a status review that's scheduled for December 18th, 2024, and no trial date has yet been set. Well, thank you for listening to Cora, Dawson, and Callan's story today. This case is a tough one, but Lindsay seemed to be acting completely normal all the way up until the time that Patrick left the house that evening. So what are the chances that in that 45 minutes that he was gone, Lindsay suddenly slipped into a psychosis and killed all 3 children? I guess it's possible, but then how did she answer the phone and speak to Patrick while he was at CVS and not lead on that anything at all was wrong? Like she was trying to hide what she was likely right in the middle of doing. What do you think? So if you like true crime and you want to hear it from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below. And turn on your notifications too, so you'll know when I upload a new video, which is at least 3 times every single week. Thanks for watching A Wicked World today. Until next time, take care guys. Bye. Thank you to all the patrons of A Wicked World. Now, there's even more of A Wicked World on Patreon. So check it out at patreon.com/awickedworld or use the Patreon app. You'll have access to exclusive videos each month and more. Any support truly helps to make sure the victims never get forgotten and to highlight the shortcomings of society associated with each case. Do you have a suggestion for a case you'd like to see me cover? If so, send me an email at awickedworldtruecrime@gmail.com.